Okay, guys, well, it's just about getting on for 5 minutes past the hour. So I think to be courteous and cognizant of those people that did sign in on time, I feel we should get started. So let me first of all share my screen with you. So you can see our agenda for the day or for the hour. There we go. Jim, can you just confirm that the audience can see that?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, guys. So, as I say, the session today will be handled by myself, Mike Nevin, and by Jim Whitehurst. And this is our structure for the next X number of minutes. If it takes us 30 minutes or 40 minutes and we're finished in that time, then we can give you some time back. If not, and if the debate is going strong, then we'll obviously try and answer some of the questions in the chat box. But this is what we're going to be talking about. So an introduction to both of us, an explanation of why we wrote the book and what drove us to do that, the focus that each of us brought to the book, because we all have different backgrounds and experience, the structure of the book to try and give you some sense of if you're going to buy the book or if you've already bought the book, what are the main parts of the book and how do they hang together? The emergence of Agile Alliances and why they're so important in the new digital world. I think that's a major aspect of the book, hence the subtitle, The Art of Agile Alliances. How you can get started. No point giving you a book if you can't use it. So how do you get started using Agile Alliances? Whereabouts in the book do you go to get the first early stages? And then what does the future hold? Where do we think this is all going? Okay, so let me just admit some more people who are turning up, and then we can go to our first slide. So our first slide obviously introduces oops, sorry, I've gone 1, 2, 4. First slide introduces the three presenters, the three authors of the book. As I say, Gavin can't join us today, unfortunately. But I'm Mike Nevin, and I've got just about 20 years this year experience of researching and benchmarking alliance relationships. Jim, would you like to introduce yourself and give some background?
Yeah, so firstly, to disappoint some of you, I'm not the Jim Whitehurst who was the president and the CEO of Red Hat. I'm the other one. I'm the other Jim Whitehurst, and as I'm older than him, I came first. So I spent 34 years at IBM, spending my last 10 years in alliance management, managing one of IBM's EMEA alliance teams. Whilst I was at IBM, I succeeded Mike as the chairman of ASAP, the Association of Alliance Professionals in the UK. After IBM, I spent 8 years at SAP, managing their EMEA relationship with IBM. Interestingly, IBM was SAP's second largest partner, but also their second largest competitor. So I learned a lot about managing competition relationships whilst I was there. After SAP, I spent 2 years at Misys, who then became Finastra, banking software, the third largest banking software vendor globally. I was managing their global relationship with IBM, so my whole career has been involved with IBM one way or another. And finally, I joined Mike at ABP as Associate Director. I've been here for 3 years.
Thanks, Jim. So let's move on to the second point that we wanted to talk a little bit about, which is why we wrote the book. What was driving us to write the book? In my particular case, as the slide suggests, I wanted to write a follow-up to the first book that I wrote, which was the Strategic Alliance Handbook. So that was published 6 years ago now. I always had it in mind, if I could, I had enough stamina, that I would produce 3 books, a trilogy. Not exactly Lord of the Rings, but certainly a trilogy. The first book would be the Strategic Alliance Handbook. And the handbook would be the theory and the research that I'd done over the previous 14 years into alliances, particularly strategic alliances, and what are the best practices that make them commercially successful. The second book was always intended to be a very practical manual, something that the practicing alliance managers, alliance and partnership managers in the field could use as it says, a field book. You would take it into the field, there'd be templates, there'd be tools, you could use them, it would be useful. So the second book was always going to be the Strategic Alliance Field Book. And then if I'm not brain dead, hopefully next year or possibly the year after, I'll be looking to produce the third in the trilogy, which is the Strategic Alliance Casebook. Casebook. So there'll be a handbook, a field book, and a casebook. And that will be the full trilogy. But I particularly wanted to explore in this book what's changed with regard to alliances, particularly over the last 5 years, because I've seen a lot of dynamic changes. So that was my justification. Jim, what about you?
Yes, thanks, Mike. I've known Mike and VST, his methodology, for many years. VST assumes a perfect world, and we all know that it's not like that out there. You get personality conflicts, you get people with other agendas, all things which impact your ability to optimize the alliance following the VST practice, best practice. So for some years now, I wanted to add my practical experience of how to optimize alliance performance within an imperfect world. And that was when I got the opportunity to join Mike and Gavin on writing this book. I thought it was a perfect opportunity for me to do that.
Great. Thanks, Jim. So let's move on. The focus, what do each of us bring to the book? Well, I think you've got a sense from what you've heard from Jim and myself already. But just to complete the picture.
You need to move on the slide, Mike.
I'm sorry?
I think you need to move on the slide. Oh, there we go. Okay.
We should be on the slide that says author's focus in the book. Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the book, we had 3 individuals. We had myself, Gavin Booth, and Jim Whitehurst. And Gavin Booth, Maria, can you take yourself off video on mute, please? Thank you. So we had 3 individuals. We had Gavin, who had a professional services background, a very heavy professional services background. So typically GSIs and advisory companies, most notably Accenture and KPMG. So he was able to speak from the point of view of how GSIs deal with alliances, how GSIs go to market with alliances, but also advisory companies. Then you had Jim. I'll allow Jim to say a few words about his particular background, but broadly he was from a technology company, whether it was IBM or SAP or more latterly Finastra. So he had that perspective of those organizations that want to partner with GSIs. And then finally you had myself, who had the research background. And so my job in the book was to try and look at both sides, integrate the views from both parties, but also to show what had gone before in terms of how we'd got here, but also where we were moving to. Jim, do you want to add anything to that around your focus?
Yeah, just to define what we mean by technology companies. So we define them as being companies who make the components that the SIs implement. So we're talking about hardware vendors, software suppliers, ISVs, and also cloud platform providers. Typically, these technology companies operate on higher margins than the SIs. And so this does make their behavior different to the SIs. So within the VST model, you'll find that the SIs and the technology partners do sort of have different behaviors because of the profitability.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so that was the 3-person focus. So here's the underlying structure of the book. As you'll recognize if you've already bought the book, there are 13 chapters. So the first chapter is Alliance history. How do we come to be here? Particularly bearing in mind the earlier book, the Strategic Alliance Handbook. It seeks to draw a connection between the two publications, but also show what has developed in the period of time since the last book and where alliances have developed. Chapter 2 was very much influenced by Jim. This is how technology companies are organized and how they partner. So Jim was Jim was the lead on that particular area, that particular section. Chapter 3 is how professional services companies are organized and partner. And not surprisingly, Gavin was the lead on chapter 3. Chapter 4 was a kind of 2-man team. This was Jim and Gavin talking about the dynamics of how each group partners with each other. It was quite fun to watch the development of that chapter, believe me. There were a number of discussions and things. Chapter 5 was my contribution in terms of what alliance optimization methodology can you use for a stable alliance relationship. An alliance that has been in place for quite some time, that's running probably reasonably effectively, but you'd like to improve it. That's what we aim VST at. Then we introduced Agile Alliances. Chapter 6 gives an overview. Why is there a need for Agile Alliances, and what would a blueprint look like? And as you'll see from the book, chapters 7 to 12 then go into a deeper dive into each of the 6 main stages of an Agile Alliance process. So we're going into some detail of what those would be. And essentially chapters 6 to 13 was a communal effort. We bounced around versions. We started out giving our own perspective and then introducing the others into it and asking them to critique it. And we hope that what came out was a good combination of the 3 minds. And then finally, chapter 13, the future of Agile Alliances, or the future of alliances generally. Where do we think it's going? What can we say with some degree of certainty now, looking at what we already see? Jim, is there anything you'd like to add to any of that?
Yeah, so I worked for many years in the traditional alliance industry, building alliances between ISVs and SIs. But with the introduction of software as a service and platform as a service and cloud, this model needs to be modified. As an example, in banking, open banking allows clients to buy solutions from a range of fintechs rather than just sticking with one ISV and waiting for the next release. This means a move from alliances towards ecosystems, multiplying the combination of partners, which has impacts on a number. It has impacts on your organizational structure, because you maybe no longer can just organize your people by partner. It has impacts on the funding measurements, on funding, on measurements, in fact, most elements of the partner management. Hence the need to modify the alliance model towards this new Agile Alliance model. So, so this whole area is very key at the moment. Hey, Mike.
Thanks, Jim. So if we moved on, why are Agile Alliances so important? Why do we feel that Agile Alliances and agility in alliances is so important? What has changed over the past 5-ish years that has made that so important? I think I've been involved, well, Jim's been involved in alliances even longer than I have, so maybe he should speak a bit to this. But from my point of view, I've been looking at alliances now for 20 years, just about 20 years this year. And what I recognized as a strategic alliance up until 3 or 4 or 5 years ago was a large relationship, probably complex, multi-country, probably complex, multi-product, multi-joint services. And when the strategic alliance was being formed, there was a period of time, quite a reasonable period of time, multiple months, when both sides were discussing and negotiating what the relationship should look like. And they had the luxury of that time because the alliance was going to be in place for a considerable period of time, probably typically average about 5 years. And they were going to be reaping the rewards over that 5-year period. So you get payback over 5 years. That generally static view of alliances has changed radically over the last 5 years. Now, alliances need to be much more responsive. They need to be much more, dare I say, agile. And I think 2 things have been driving that. The first is the emergence of ecosystems. We're seeing a lot now of people talking about ecosystems, but also exploring new models of ecosystems, not just partner ecosystems, although that's where it started, but also business ecosystems. The idea of businesses building their own ecosystems to harness value. There's a great recent report by EY and a guy called Greg Sarafin, who is the head of alliances and ecosystems at EY, which looks at the connection between the maturity of an organization's ecosystem, partner ecosystem, or business ecosystem, and the value of the company. And EY researched something like 400 companies to derive their data. And what they show in that report is a very, very clear connection between the maturity of the ecosystem and the value creation of the organization, the value that the organization enjoys. If you need a link to that report, please let me know and I can send it to you. So 2 things are driving this agility. The first is ecosystems, and the second is digitization. Oh gosh, if I had a penny for every time I've read a report that has digitization or digital in a sentence, I'd be a rich man. But there's no doubt that digitization has accelerated or even hyper accelerated business in the early part of the 21st century. So you don't have the luxury anymore, even with a strategic alliance. I don't feel you have the luxury of spending 6 or 12 months negotiating the strategic alliance, securing the knowledge that you'll have 5 years to get payback, because in that 6 or 12 month period, however long the period it is, there are opportunities emerging, erupting, you might say, in the marketplace that you want to take advantage of. And if you don't take advantage of them, you'll lose that opportunity. So you have to move quickly. Not only that, but you also have to make the link to the earlier world and the earlier form of strategic alliances. You also have some older strategic alliances that were formed when the world was a different place, when strategies were different, when the market was different, when the competition was different, when the players were different. And so those established alliance relationships are now themselves talking about, how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we pivot quickly to be more responsive to the new market and what's happening? Jim, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I see we've had a message from Ashish. I hope I've got your name right, Ashish, who says, does the size basis revenue matter in the world of agile alliances? As today we have tiers, premium, gold, platinum, as per the revenue it generates. Size always matters, Ashish, but I think you're on an important point there, which is certainly in the past, I've worked for organizations that have had big debates about, do we organize alliances by partner or do we organize them by industry? And we've always ended up organizing by partner because that loyalty, that relationship between the two people who are in the alliance really mattered. Now you've got ecosystems where actually the partners involved could well change from customer to customer. I think it might now be swinging the balance back towards organizing by industry. So I think those tierings, which were due to about how much revenue you generated per partner, probably need to be rethought. And it might be more to do with the industry, particularly if you've got a cross-industry product that you're dealing with.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So I think we've reasonably argued the case for agility in alliances. So let's get to the meat of it, if that's the right way of phrasing it. How do you get started? How would you organize yourself to develop and deploy a specifically agile alliance? So if you look at chapter 6 in the book, it introduces the concept of excuse me, agile alliances. It also gives you a table, and this is the table that you'll be able to see in there that gives you each of the stages and gives you a very, very high overview level of the purpose of each stage and a very small partial list of key tasks, the objective of that particular stage, and what is the output of that stage. So this is where you would start. This would be your initial blueprint, your high-level blueprint. And then, of course, what you would do as you went through each stage is you'd look at the respective chapters. So the chapters 7 to 13. So chapter 7 for stage 1, chapter 8 for stage 2, etc., etc., etc. So here's where you would start. Jim, any thoughts on that before we move on?
No, nothing else, Mike. That's fairly clear.
Cheers. Okay. The point I want to make here with this slide is that we've discussed agile alliances in the book, and we encourage you, obviously, to think about some of the points that we raise and discuss and debate in the book. But agile alliances is not just a process. It's more about a state of mind. It's about far more than just a simple process. Yes, definitely the first point on this slide, it helps to have some kind of best practice model that you can follow. And when I say a best practice model, what I mean is a model which has been tested practically over the past 5 years. So my role in writing the book with my two colleagues was to generate some data, to look at some practicing organizations, put some of these ideas forward and spot whether they were using some of the aspects of agile alliances that we talked about. And what I discovered, of course, was that they were quite reasonably reacting to what they were finding as the changes in the marketplace. They weren't waiting for a book to describe it. So the first thing is it helps if you have some kind of a best practice model, something that hopefully both or indeed all sides within the ecosystem can follow. But the new leading edge partnering organizations are realizing that alliances and partnering is not just a problem for the partnership department or the alliance department, or indeed the head of alliances or the head of partnerships. You can't just drop an alliance problem at these doors and walk away from it. The goal is to become an agile organization, to have collaboration as a corporate competence. And to do that, you need to imbue the entire organization with this attitude and this belief that active collaboration, and particularly agile collaboration, is an attractive business competitive advantage. Now, I've seen this personally from a number of organizations that I've worked with. Not many, I will say that, but some of the very best of the best break their collaboration efforts into two areas, internal and external. Internally, they create what used to be called skunk works. They create fast forming teams to solve a particular problem or to develop a particular new product or new service. When that product or service or when that problem is solved, the team dissolves. But the ability for that team to come together quickly, for them to use collaborative behaviors and attitudes, for them to understand and be secure in the knowledge that the organization regards collaboration as important, is an important aspect in that. And then, of course, externally, the ability to be able to be flexible in your alliances is becoming increasingly crucial, because as ecosystems develop and as the different ecosystems that you can choose as organizations develop, then you have a decision. And your decision is, are we going to be an ecosystem owner or are we going to be an ecosystem player? If you're an ecosystem owner, then what you want in your ecosystem are agile alliances, alliances that can react to the latest stresses and strains of the marketplace. If you're a player, then you want your alliances to be sufficiently agile that you can be a player in multiple platforms or multiple ecosystems. The point I've made there in the third bullet is that collaborative corporate competence is a must now. It's a need, driven as it is by the new ecosystem business model. So the new ecosystem business model, I don't think is going away. You'll hear a bit more about this when we talk about the future. I don't think it's going away, and it's becoming increasingly more important. And because it's becoming more important, the alliances, which are the bedrock of these ecosystems, have to be flexible, have to be able to accommodate multiple different types of ecosystem. And as I say in the final point, Agile doesn't just refer to the alliance itself, but it also refers to the corporate mindset and the mindsets of the people recruited to design, deploy, and develop Agile alliances. I'm sure you've seen, and I'm absolutely certain I've seen, certain organizations that are very rigid in their thinking. You know, we've been successful in the past, we've sold direct. Why would we need alliances? What is the possible purpose of alliances for us? Why do we need to share our margin with anybody? We can go it alone. I don't think there's a company left on the planet that really believes they can go it alone anymore. But that bedrock of thinking and that culture in organizations takes a long time to change. We use analogies like large oil tankers in the ocean. It moves even slower than that. I think I'd be talking about glaciers. Jim, any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, so we've had an interesting chat through from, once again, I hope I've got the pronunciation right here, from Sushil. And he says, I have observed from many instances where end customer organizations has got exploratory teams who reach out to technology OEMs and ISVs for, say, emerging technology requirements. They eventually open up opportunities with various business teams internally. Do you think signing an alliance agreement with them makes sense? Or can they just be end customers for pointed opportunities? My initial thoughts on that are that one of the things we found with Agile Alliances is that speed is important. To get these things up and running, I mean, often you will get the, where before you've done a lot of preparatory work, before you thought of signing an alliance and going to market. Now it's probably the other way around and you go to market first. And I think if you're going to market with one, with one of these technology OEMs for one particular customer situation, then by all means just go ahead and do it. If you find that it's been so successful, you're now starting to ramp it up and it becomes a many customer situation, then they're probably, it is the right thing to start thinking about signing alliance agreements where you can start looking at how you can push the relationship even further with that particular organization.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, and can I encourage you, if you have any questions, please do feel free to post them in the chat box. We're quite happy to answer any questions that you raise. Okay, so let's move on. What does the future hold? Where do we think that the future is going? So I've got some thoughts here. I've jotted them down. I know Jim's got some thoughts as well. But from my point of view, what I observe as an alliance researcher is that the Agile Alliance models that we've talked about so far, and the concept of Agile Alliances, I think will develop further. I think it'll become more sophisticated. And I think you'll have Agile Alliance models developed specific to certain industries. I know we touched on that slightly earlier. Jim was talking about that slightly earlier. Do we organize our alliances by partner or by industries? I think there are differences, obviously, between different industries, and those differences demand sophistications of approach. I say sophistications because I think the underlying requirement is still the same. The underlying requirement is that your alliance should be quick, as Jim said. It should be quick to form. It should be quick to show value. It should be able to scale. It should be able to grow as a relationship, but it should also be responsive. It should be flexible so that it can flex to the changes that happen in that particular industry. So that's one development that I see early signs of. I think some of the conversations I've had with EY, for example, I mentioned Greg Sarafin earlier. Greg developed a very, very powerful industry-specific mini ecosystem with EY in the insurance industry in the United States. Some of the traditional insurers in the States were becoming increasingly nervous about the new disruptors that were beginning to come into the marketplace, not least because these new disruptors weren't traditional insurance companies. Some of them were technology companies. Some of them were companies that were offering services that hadn't been seen before. And what Greg was able to do was he was able to throw the EY arms around these new entrants, and he was able to offer to the larger organizations what you might call controlled disruption as a service. So basically, he went to the large insurance companies and said, look, you're frightened of dealing directly with these smaller organizations. Well, that's okay, because EY will do some work to decide which of these disruptive organizations could work well together to form them into an effective ecosystem. And then we'll sell their services back to you so that you can enable and innovate your core processes. It's a very innovative model. And it's that kind of industry focus that I think will happen more and more as we move further on. Second point, the development of industry standards for collaboration. We've been talking about this for quite some time over the last 15, 20 years, but I really feel, if you look at the next point, the third point down, I really feel that we're at the point now where organizations are beginning to realize that standards and having standards is a good thing. And I would particularly point you towards the ISO 44001 international standard for business-to-business collaborative working. Now, standards are not for everybody. And obviously, if a standard just means you pin an award to a wall and do no more, then they're worthless. But this idea of standards and this idea of having organizations which are certified in certain international areas, certainly collaboration, will make the ecosystem and the formation of ecosystems easier and more effective, I believe. And it's really gaining some ground now. Traditionally, it's been in the public sector, government-controlled, defense type industries. It's now beginning to move into the technology area. And I know one major GSI player who has experimented with this specific to a particular specific to a particular geography, the UK. And they're seeing some very, very good payback from the effort and the budget they've allocated for becoming ISO 44001 certified. The next point is an interesting one, because I first came across this point many, many years ago, at least 20 years ago. There's a wonderful book by Neil Rackham, which was well ahead of its time. It's called Getting Partnering Right. And Neil made the point in there that when an organization posts its value, when an organization fills in a balance sheet or reports to external auditors or reports to shareholders the results of the investigation done by the external auditors, increasingly, he said 20 years ago, that account should be taken of the value that was implicit in some of these off-balance sheet relationships, these collaborations, which were creating value and which were requiring resource, but didn't show up on the balance sheet. Now, Neil was a gentleman well ahead of his time in many respects, and I think he was well ahead of his time in that. I haven't seen any external auditors doing what I would call relationship audits to any great degree with major organizations. Not yet, but I believe that will definitely come. I think organizations will start to realize that a lot of their value is tied up in the alliances, the ecosystem, the collaborations, the partnerships that they have, and they have to take account of that. And the external auditors will drive that. Obviously, we talked about the shift in focus from binary alliances to ecosystem management. I don't think we need to dwell on that. But then in support of that, I think, sorry, there's a typo there. It's not he growth, it's the growth in more sophisticated partner relationship management systems. Previously, partner relationship management systems were what I would call hub and spoke approaches. So you would have a hub, which would be the organization itself. Then you would have multiple spokes, which would be all the partners that organization had. And it was very much a command and control type model. The central organization, be it an Amazon, be it an SAP, an IBM, a Cisco, whoever, set the rules, set the standards, and the partners had to follow them. And those rules were embedded. And the PRM system helped them to automate those rules and those procedures that the organizations had to follow. What's happening now with the development of ecosystems and with the development of this fluidity of connection between multiple organizations is that you're starting to get platforms developing. One of the probably best known at the moment is a platform called Workspan. Workspan has a platform which allows organizations to put their partnerships onto the platform and manage them on that platform. But it doesn't do it in a hub and spoke approach. It allows any partner on the platform to manage their relationship with any other partner. So it's a very cloud fluid based type multiple relationship. And I can see that there will be even more development in this area. We're already beginning to see organizations like Gartner, Forrester, IDC. They're struggling to come to terms and to develop terms for these new types of platforms and tools and systems that can help with these kind of relationships. Jim, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, so my thought is, Mike, if I think back to the binary alliances, which I was brought up on, we'd already had them for a few years in IBM before we met you. And
IOJ 45.
Sorry, if you're an attendee, could you please put yourself on mute? I'm not exactly sure how you got yourself off mute, but could you please put yourself on mute? Thank you. Sorry, Jim, yeah?
Yeah, and we'd already had alliances for a few years when we first met you, Mike. And when you brought along your VST, it was good because it was a process that actually matched what we were doing anyway. I feel like it gave us a science, a methodology behind what we were doing anyway, which we developed ad hoc. If I now look at the new ecosystem type scenario, it's infinitely more complex. And I think many companies are really going to struggle to get their head around how they build this ecosystem management in place. Now, I don't think any longer will someone be able to come up with a process like you did with VST. But I'm hoping that what we've done through this book is to provide a set of templates so that everybody can much quicker get their own individual processes in place. Because the process, I think, will now change from company to company. Because some will own ecosystems, some will be part of ecosystems, etc. And I'm hoping what we're doing through this book is providing people with the templates to short circuit that process, to allow them to get some rigid, I won't say rigidity, I think that's not the right word, but anyway, to try and get their own process in place so they can get up and go stable. And it's actually much more than just the Alliance team, because whether you're going to be owning the ecosystem or part of it is the sort of strategic decision the company's going to have to make, because it's very much going to be where you want to position yourself within the industry that you supply. So hopefully, I'm hoping this book is going to give this short circuit that process for people.
Thanks, Jim. Great. Okay. Okay. So we've come to the end of the formal part of the presentation. I just wanted to pick up on a question from Brian that was mentioned earlier, and then I'll come back to the further resources and the use of the discount code. But if I go back to the chat area, I think there was a question from Brian earlier. So Brian says, we're a startup and just signing up as partners with a couple of technology organizations. Well, there's an early heads up. It's going to be a question for Jim. I'm going to do one of those hospital pass things. Technology organizations. They have well-established partner ecosystems with small and larger consultancies, SIs. What advice would you give us to make an impact and stand out from the crowd so we get their attention and share of marketing and joint MDF, etc.? Jim, do you want to have a shot at that first, then I'll give my views?
Yeah, I'm just scanning through the chats. I can't see that one, Mike. But...
It was a direct message to me. Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, so what I'd say, I mean, any sales training will tell you that you're not selling your product, you're selling a solution to the client's problems. So what you've got to work out is what those companies are actually looking for. I mean, there's a term we used to use a lot called give to get. And Alliance was about what you're going to give and what you're looking to get back. And you've got to work out what they're looking to get and can you give it to them. So that's the way that I believe you stand out to make yourself. I mean, there's all sorts of classic ways to do it, like clearly if you've got a great relationship with a client that they want to get into, they're going to be all over you if they know about it, right? But actually find out what it is that they're looking for and how you can address that. And if you can't, then you're probably better off going somewhere else, right? Than wasting lots of effort in trying to make your relationship work. It's never going to work. And in terms of how you find out what they're looking for, well, Alliance Best Practice can often help you there, because Alliance Best Practice has links to loads and loads of clients. And Mike has an address book that he could charge a fortune for, because he has contacts in most companies. So if you're struggling to understand what it is they're looking for, we can probably help you.
Yeah. So I think my contribution would be somewhat more pragmatic and down to earth. I think the reality is, if you're trying to get the attention of a big GSI or a large global advisory company, the harsh reality is you've got to offer them something. You've got to go to them with some kind of a possible deal, some kind of an opportunity, because otherwise they're not really interested. They're not. Money talks, and unfortunately, to get their attention in the first place, you will have to take them some kind of a deal. The problem for me and the challenge for me is that you can't keep doing that. Obviously, you can't keep simply giving them leads or finding leads that they could be that would be attractive to them. So you have to somehow make the connection between here are some leads that we've been able to provide, and shift into we satisfied that client's or that customer's needs by that opportunity. Now, there are other clients with those same opportunities, and you are a major GSI, you're much bigger than we are, so you have greater access to those kinds of clients. But the fact is that you've received some services revenue from the fact that we brought that opportunity to you. So if you look at that opportunity as a mini model, what if we did 5 or 10 or 20 more of those? Then if you can get the organization interested to that level, and that's typically around personal relationships, typically around the practice lead or the head of that particular part of the GSI or advisory company that is responsible for the problem you're solving or for the industry you're addressing, or indeed sometimes for the major client that you're dealing with. If you can get that relationship, and if you can show him or her that you can bring value and grow their business, then I think you're on the right path. And the end of that path, of course, if your organization is so inclined, is the development of a practice dedicated to your particular offering. So the example I would give you here is Salesforce. You know, Salesforce went to the GSIs and said, you can make money out of customer excellence, out of our software. And having given them some opportunities and having seen the sort of business that could be generated from it, quite rapidly, the major GSI started to form their own Salesforce practices and focus specifically on Salesforce as an enabler of CRM assignments and CRM related business. So simple answer, you've got to take them something in the first place, but then you've got to build the relationship out. And that is a reflection, and that lies at the heart of the Agile Alliances approach. The previous approach was relationship first, then results, then revenue. Now it's very much revenue, then relationship. So let me look at the questions. Can you speak to shift in funding mechanisms for co-innovation, stroke integration, and a mechanism in the Agile Alliance framework? What are your recommendations for handling funding, a key element of success? That's from Indira. Yes, Indira. So my answer there would be, if you look in the book and you look at the different sections, you'll see whereabouts in the 6-stage process we actually address that idea of co-funding. In simple terms, you can't ask for co-funding at the beginning before you've got any business. You have to prove the use case, and you have to show the partner that use case is replicable. Once you've done that, then I think you can move to the point where you talk about what I would call joint MDF, joint marketing development funds. But you can't do it at the beginning because you haven't proven the case. You have to prove the case first, and then you have to scale and grow. I can't see too many other questions, so let me explain the slide that you're seeing here. So the final slide obviously is the promise that we made at the beginning of this webinar, which is that if you wish, if you haven't already bought the book, you can buy a copy with a 40% discount. So this is the first link here. So if I click on this link, by the way, if you want to use these links, everybody who's attended will get a copy of the slides so you can think about them, and a copy of the session, or at least a link to the video. But when we send you a copy of these slides, if you put the slides in presentation mode, you'll see that this becomes a live HTML. So for example, when you click on it, as I click on the order book using the SAF40 code, it will take you to the place you need to go to be able to order the book. And you can order the paperback, the hardback, or the ebook. The 40% applies to all three. To get your 40%, you would choose your format. Let's say you were traveling a lot and you wanted an ebook. Okay, you can either rent it, 6-month rental, or you can have a 12-month rental. Let's say you just wanted to rent it for 6 months. So you add it to the cart. And when it's added to the cart, there we go. You can view your cart. And at checkout here, you would enter your promo code. And that is Strategic Alliance Fieldbook, SAF 40, no gaps. Then you'd apply the code. And you'll see that you get the reduction. So here you've got the Strategic Alliance Fieldbook, £16.50 rather than £24.99. Here you've got the Fieldbook, instead of it being £35.98 and £29.99, there's 2 of them. So you're getting them both for £17.40. So that's the first link. If I go back to the second link, there is an Agile Alliances user group on LinkedIn. So again, if you have your PowerPoint slide deck in presentation mode, if you click on that, it will take you directly to the Agile Alliances user group, and you can apply to join the group. So at the moment, we've got 29 members. And as you can see, we've got some discussion. We've got the fact that this event was going on. We've got some discussion of the book. Some people have been kind enough to say, I like this part or I like that part. And what we're looking to do is put things in here which are useful to Agile Alliance practitioners. So people who want to use this whole concept of Agile Alliances. And the third place you can go for any resources is the Alliance Best Practice website. So Jim mentioned earlier that Alliance Best Practice, having written the book, have got some resources that you can use. So again, you would click on this link here, you'd be taken to the Alliance Best Practice website, and all you need to do is you can sign in with a username. If you're not a member already, you can invent a username for yourself. The best one to use is your email address or an email address that you want to use, and then develop a password for yourself. And when you've done that, you can start to search in the download section. And in the download section, in here, there's a keyword search. And what we're going to be doing over the course of the next 4 to 6 weeks is developing practical templates and tools from some of the concepts that we've discussed and debated in the book. There's a range of different resources there already, of course, from the previous best practices around alliances. You can see quite a number of these. I won't go through them all because there's 150 of them and it might take quite a while. But here, if you search specifically for Agile or Agile Alliances as a keyword search, you'll start to see all the Agile Alliances tools and templates start to come through. So thank you very much indeed for your continued attention. I do appreciate it. Jim, any last thoughts from you before we finish?
No, Mike. I think it's hopefully we've covered the material people wanted. And clearly, if people still have outstanding questions once the call is finished, they can still contact us using some of the links we've got there in the back page. No problem. And we finished 2 minutes early. How about that? Thanks, guys. Thank you, Jim. And thank you for everybody who attended. Thanks for your attention. Bye-bye.